From his presidential campaign to the White House, Donald Trump has not shied away from weighing in on the already divisive topic of religion in America. He has aligned himself with the Christian right by being openly pro-life, touting exclusively pro-life judges, and implementing new policies that limit LGBTQ rights, specifically around transgender military service members. White evangelicals continue to overwhelmingly support the president. According to a 2019 Pew Research survey, almost 70% approve of the way President Trump has been running the country. That's only slightly lower than it was during President Trump's first 2 years in the White House. But there is a startling contrast between white and black evangelical support for the president, with just 12% of black evangelical support, according to the survey. I sat down with Reverend Al Sharpton at National Action Network to discuss the divide. Sharpton is a Baptist minister, civil rights activist, and host of Politics Nation on MSNBC.
I think that black evangelicals are not unmindful of the fact they're still black, and they have to deal with the socio-economic reality that blacks live a different life, have different economic and social options, have a different way they're handled by the criminal justice system. So life for blacks and whites in this country is still much different. And that is also true in the evangelical community. So they may agree with some of what white evangelicals preach, but when it comes to how their lives are going to be managed and governed, there is a difference because they understand they're governed differently.
So in December, the former editor of Christianity Today, Mark Galli, he called for Trump's removal from office, citing that not only are the allegations of Trump's collusion with a foreign power undeniably true, but also on moral grounds. Do you think that it's, how much should morals and character play into voting?
I think that people have a right to consider morality and values. And I do not think that it is a wrong concept to have a separation between church and state. Church should not run the state. But if you're a member of a church, you should be guided by your own values and your own morals to say that I want to see somebody that I think has some values that correspond with mine in office. There's nothing wrong with that. Now, that does not mean you want to see the tenets of a given church or the dogma of a church-run government, but you do want somebody that has the values that you would want your children to emulate, sitting in the highest office of the land. Or you do want someone that has the values of respect for human life sitting in office. So I think that there is a division of church and state, but there's not a division between the voter and the voter's values.
The Pope had made comments that he questioned whether Trump was really a Christian, with Trump responding that that was offensive and that a religious leader should never question a person's faith. As a faith leader yourself, what do you think about that?
I think that the Pope has the right to question how he sees Christianity and whether or not Mr. Trump fits that description. He is a religious leader, and he has a right to define the religion as he practices it and says what he wants about another head of state. If I said I did not think a person was a Baptist, I'm talking from my experience and my definition. There's nothing wrong with that.
Yeah. I spoke to some evangelical leaders and pastors in Wichita, Kansas on this issue. I want to show you what they said.
In my humble opinion, Mr. Trump is the epitome of Christian hypocrisy and of a faith that expresses one thing and lives a completely contradictory lifestyle.
I've always said from the beginning when he got elected that he was the Antichrist.
We all read the same Bible, but then we look at the same evidence, we look at the same criteria, we look at the same data, and we keep reaching totally different conclusions.
So when black evangelicals support Trump, then I have to wonder where your ethos is. Where are you coming from? Because he's taken us back.
Republicans act as if the only two issues that have moral value are abortion and homosexuality.
They are not kingdom issues. Jesus did not preach hate homosexuals, nor did he preach about the fact that the only life that you are to sanctify is in vitro, is in the womb.
There was 22 Republican candidates that all probably felt the same about abortion. They probably felt the same about everything else traditionally that we care about as people of faith. Why didn't you vote for them?
I pray that he be in health, that his family is well.
That he be respectfully be retired.
My prayer is that at some point that he would wake up.
But my bigger prayer is that he's not president after 2020.
What are your thoughts on the leader's points?
I think they're right. I think that when they say that there's hypocrisy, when they say that if you read the scriptures, we come to different conclusions. And I think that I totally agree that it is a prayer that I join in, that he's not president in 2020. I think after the 2020 election, I think that it is very clear that even in the faith community, there is a very serious polar view of Donald Trump. And you only can ask yourself how some of the white evangelicals can preach one thing and give him a pass on almost everything they preach about.
So do you see this as a moral dilemma?
I see it as hypocrisy. A dilemma means we can't figure it out. I think we figured it out, that many of them preach one thing, and in order to get access to power, in order to support the courts, they will do the opposite. That's not a dilemma, that is hypocrisy.
Well, I spoke to a few lay people who see it differently from their religious leaders. I just want you to take a look.
The Trump administration has aligned beautifully with my values.
What's the other side? Either you go with Trump and you deal with Christian family values, or you go with them and you're dealing with transgender everything, abortion everything.
Being a Christian, I don't see absolutely no way to vote for the Democrats. Because once again, if you support 9-month abortion, infanticides, transgendering, which is desecration of the body.
If you're a true Christian, it doesn't make sense to support those things.
It's so funny to me when you hear people say that the president contradicts himself as a Christian. We all contradict ourselves as Christians. Nobody's perfect.
Who does match with Jesus? No one does. Everyone has a filthy mouth. Everyone is sinful on this whole planet.
I'm not a judge, but President Trump could be a baby Christian. So therefore, being a baby Christian, you need to be fed, in which he's doing. He's surrounding himself with pastors.
The people that say this is like, oh, I didn't know you were the moral superior.
I've been invited to the White House a couple of times. I met his kids and stuff like that. And to me, I don't think that they're racist or they have a racist bone in their body.
Thank God we have a president who is actually putting Christian values back on the forefront.
I mean, first of all, I think that for them to say that people believe that people have the right to choose their lives is not, in my opinion, what they represent. To say that I may give my view that people have the right, women have the right to choose whether or not they're going to have a child or not, does not mean that I would do that in my choice. It means I don't have the right to impose my will. So they have a very narrow view of what government's about. I may disagree with abortion personally. That's not the issue. The issue is, do I have the right to put my personal will on another person? That's the difference. And once you allow the state to make moral and value decisions for anybody, they make it for everybody. So then suppose if somebody of a different religion becomes president, do they have the right to make me as a Baptist illegal? So freedom of choice doesn't mean you agree with everybody's choice. It means you agree they have the right to the choice. Now, I may preach to the person as a minister, if you choose that, you're committing a sin and you're going to hell. But you have the right to choose it. Even God gave you a choice of heaven and hell. So how are you going to say, I'm going to force you to do what I think is right?
Pew Research reported that 25% of all Americans identify as evangelical Protestants, while only 6% identify as black evangelicals. So I guess in closing, are black evangelicals a large enough voting bloc to make a difference in 2020? And how do you predict?
If the Pew report is right, and black evangelicals are only 6%, that seems small unless you have an election that hinges on 1 or 2%. That becomes a big block then. So sometimes, to be biblical, sometimes you got to take little smooth stones to bring down Goliath. If it's close, 6% might weigh in a lot.
And how do you predict the black church as a majority will vote in 2020?
I think the majority of the black vote will a black church will vote against Donald Trump, because I preach every Sunday at different churches. I haven't preached at one church that when the folk walked out of church, they wasn't black, which means any policeman could pull them over. They're going to housing that they've been zoned in. They're going to send their kids to different kind of schools. They're still black. They're on their way to heaven, but they're living on earth, and the earth is not equal. And I think that's why they will not vote for Donald Trump.
Reverend Sharpton, thank you for being with me.
Thank you.